welcome. It's our second panel of the day, and what a show to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the Burberry Prorsum show, and also what a panel to have with me. Next to me I have Ruth Chapman, who's founder of Matches. I then have Hywel Davies, who's now a veteran panellist and fashion writer. I also have Caryn Evans, fashion historian, and at the end there I have Caryn Franklin, wonderful fashion commentator. How are you all enjoying London Fashion Week so far?
This little extra experience has really enhanced it for me, actually.
Oh, great, that's nice to hear. Has everyone been going to the shows?
Yeah, I've loved it so far. I think the last 3 days, particularly for me, have been incredible. The shows that I've seen, I've been really blown away. And I think, once again, for me, this is now about the 6th season when I think British fashion has really just led the way. We're just powering forward. New York was better this season, but right now I think London is the place to be. It's where we see the most creative fashion coming through.
Well, it's interesting that Burberry's show, they've called it sort of a celebration of London, and there's that pride sort of from within fashion about London. I want to sort of ask about Burberry as a brand, because you said we've got this kind of creativity in London. I think a lot of the excitement about London is the kind of young designers, so people like Christopher Kane,
yes,
Jonathan Saunders. But Burberry, obviously, they've been around since 1856, so it's less young. How do you think they've managed to stay so current? Maybe that's a question for you, Caryn, as a fashion historian. How do you think they've managed to kind of reinvent themselves?
Well, paradoxically, I think actually they reinvented themselves some years ago as a great British brand by getting an American CEO to come and breathe some new life into them. And I think one of the interesting things about big brands like Burberry and actually Paul Smith is quite what it means to be a British designer, particularly if you're a British designer that plays on that riff of heritage as much as innovation, because very often the clothes aren't made in the UK, sometimes the designers aren't always British, or I mean, obviously Christopher Bailey is, but it's quite difficult to think what is British design actually in a global age.
Why do you think Burberry, you mentioned kind of this idea of heritage, and they've really made that sort of their selling point now at the moment, but why do you think it's worked for Burberry but not for someone like Aquascutum, which had that incredible heritage as well?
I think essentially what Burberry have done really cleverly and neatly is the way they promoted and communicated the brand. So essentially when I think of Burberry, I think of not just about the collection, but it's everything that goes with it in how they communicate to their audiences.
It's true. I think that's a consistency that Christopher Bailey's managed to put right through, that you see through the stores, you see it in their offices. There's no element of Burberry that's untouched by that culture. So there's a very, very consistent thread, if you like, that runs through everything.
I think it's also down to personalities, isn't it? Everybody wants to identify with figureheads, and Christopher Bailey is a very, ticks all the boxes in terms of figurehead.
He's very current, isn't he? He always has the moment, he always captures that moment, the right musician. I'm sure we'll see that today.
Yeah, he's all British.
But he's also very available.
Yes.
A time when people want a piece of something to actually engage with, a piece of somebody. And he is very warm and generous, and he's looking outwards at the consumer.
And he's you're right, very sort of, I think, unaffected. I always liked with that time when there was all that criticism of Chavs and Burberry. And he had a really great response, was to say, well, I'm working class, so you're saying working class people can't have nice clothes. Yeah. And I think it is a very kind of user-friendly brand in that way. It's not, doesn't really trade on its kind of exclusivity.
And it definitely makes it very accessible to lots of people through the social media, really. With the Instagram, the Facebook, the Twitter, they're so active on all those platforms.
They are reaching out.
So everybody is aware of Burberry and all age groups. It's accessible at lots of different points.
I'm interested, you mentioned these kind of digital channels, because for me that's, I think, what, as we said, that's what Burberry's kind of built their strength on. We were talking before the stream started about that, things like the innovations in the store. So if you try on a jacket, you see it being worn by the model on the runway, you see it being made. Do you think that's kind of, is it technology going a bit far, kind of almost overshadowing the clothes? These kind of incredible, they've got 3 streams going. There's kind of live tweeting straight from the show. You can love things on Facebook as the show happens.
I didn't find that when I went into the store, and I'm a complete dinosaur. I mean, I'm not even on Facebook.
So I actually thought it was about the kind of physicality of the clothes, and everyone's in some ways it was actually quite Edwardian. That was what was interesting, was how integrated the technology was. So you have all these like very friendly shop assistants, and they are rather like Edwardian clerks or something, with their iPads. And it's even sort of down the road from where the Café de Paris used to be, and it's got that kind of lushness in the decor. So I think it's a kind of mixture of a sort of certain kind, although of course it's very grand, but it's a mixture of a certain kind of familiarity, a kind of fin de siècle, a kind of luxury, with all this, quite comfortably integrated technology. You can actually ignore it if you don't get it,
Yeah.
You say that word luxury, which I think is so integral to Burberry's success, especially internationally, because this is a brand that's really sort of doing very well overseas. Do you think it is that idea of sort of Britishness that has built its success, especially abroad? Perhaps read to someone who sells Burberry.
I think the British thing is really important, and I think there's always a thread in there. And I think looking at where they've come from and that coat business that they are known for, that's a common thread. The British thing plays to that because we have such terrible weather, but they have
outer
that,
layers.
Yeah, they always have that core coat thing going on, which they always manage to develop in a new way. But I think on the digital thing, I think it's I think they're always first to have whatever it is, and it is the friendliness, the familiarity of the way that they do it, and they marry the personal part with the in-store experience with the digital, so you can choose which way you want to go. You can, if you can buy from the live stream, you've got the choice. You're offering the customer more choice than ever. You can literally buy it through Facebook if you want to, or you can go into the store and have some fab person look after you.
I think this is gone.
I was just saying, what's really interesting about we're talking about the digital platforms is they're really appealing to a very young audience that maybe isn't necessarily going to be able to afford Prorsum, which is expensive.
But I think things move so quickly that you need to, if you want to have a brand at that scale, you need to capture that audience in advance almost. So I think early on you're engaging with those people, and it's aspirational. And
aren't there, I think, something like 200 miles of extra cable built in to the store behind the scenes, so that as if when the technology is there, the cabling is already built in.
But I think there are really interesting frontiers that are rolling out as we're witnessing them, and one is around sort of digital platforms and broadcast. I was just reminiscing that in the early days it was impossible to get into a show, sometimes even when you had a ticket, because it was too crowded, too many clever students had gotten in before you, and that was that. And the doors were shut. Oh, is it?
Yeah, sorry.
But this show, I'm just going to finish this, because this show is going to be broadcast live in Hyde Park. So anybody can watch it as it unfolds, and that's a massive switch.
It's the democratization of fashion, isn't it? In the most obvious way.
It is.
'Cause we're watching this, but so is millions of people across the web.
It is.
I love that unveiling of the venue as well. It's such a statement of the might of Burberry.
But that's an unusual camera angle. So is that it? That's them having cameras all over the place to film this, especially as a production, as opposed to straight runway.
But that's interesting for them, because I think their show, the word production, you're right, it's almost like the theatrical nature of it. It's not just about the clothes, it's about this venue, it's about the fact that everyone's there. You have that with those sort of blinds coming over. It's almost like a curtain going back into the world.
And this will be utilised as a production in store and everywhere. They'll put it on the web, and they'll recognise it as having lots of value.
Can that overshadow the clothes though? Do you ever worry?
When I think of Burberry, I think of everything around the brand and not always the clothes first.
But to be honest, does anybody just buy into the clothes these days? We're all looking for membership of something that has a meaning, and a story for us, and that's more why people make choices to align themselves with a brand, however small or large.
I think what's quite interesting when you think about Burberry, we talk about it being a British brand. It's whether it's fashion made for outside Britain, not necessarily for British people.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the
Absolutely.
For sure.
And we're seeing those great coats again, even though it's spring, summer, some fantastic out of it.
Yeah. That's fantastic, isn't it?
It seems quite a bright collection.
Decorative.
Yeah.
But, unusually.
Yeah.
And they've continued those metallics over from the men's with that really shiny.
Yeah.
Because I always think sometimes that Baby always feels slightly, the colours are always quite dusty.
Yeah, it's kind of dusty
Yeah,
jewels.
it's quite nostalgic. This feels much more modern. And young,
Yeah.
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
If you look at the kind of girls they choose, like someone like it when they had Emma Watson or Cara at the moment, they are those kind of young girls that sort of almost teenagers look up to.
I think also
They do, for sure.
one thing we didn't mention about, it was really down to Burberry that London Fashion Week became such a big international success again when they came back for I think it was for 25 years. It really cemented London as an important place to come and see.
But, we're talking about the clothes, we're talking about the technology. We are on the edge of a massive game changer to do with data capture. And so everybody buys into this and does Burberry's broadcasting for them to their own groups, and at the same time they recruit the information about that person. Now, we don't know where technology is going to go, but certainly, the body scanning pods that can create 200 different measurements about somebody from their measurements, the information that they can get about pre-sales, about consumer activity is really what a lot of this is about. It's dressed up as consumer experience, interacting with the brand, but it's driven by the desire for better targeted sales.
It's business.
Absolutely.
And that's what Burberry have done so well. It's a huge, successful global business.
Having said that, on the 11th they had that sort of announcement that their profits are slowing down. Their share price fell 21%. Is that a worry? Are the tables turning for Burberry? Technology at its best. It's probably Burberry coming to tell you their life started.
I don't think so. I just think Burberry's been growing so quickly for such a long time. There's going to be points where it's not growing as fast as it was, and they've opened so many stores everywhere, and it's still a really innovative, brave.
We were talking about this the other day, and I think there's an element here that the customer, whilst really engaged with Burberry and has that incredible luxury corporate feel to it, certainly the customers that we're seeing are looking for a slightly more niche element to their luxury, a slightly more artisan feeling to it. So the designers that we're seeing in London right now, that we were talking about earlier, Christopher, Erdem, people are really engaged with them because they feel they're buying into something which is independent, which is very luxurious, which is almost a piece of art for your body, that isn't mass produced, and not implying that Burberry is, but there is an element of a corporate business that feels less appealing right now than something that's niche
I think
to a lot of
really
customers.
This idea of soul in clothing, which I think perhaps Burberry
or soul and a talking point as well. The customers that are buying into Mary Cat Transy that we're seeing, they're real statement pieces, but they have an element of artistry about them that you can see, that people can talk about when they go out for dinner or whatever they're doing. So I think that's really important now, when you see that. If you want to spend that amount of money on a garment, you want it to do that for you.
I think you also want to feel like you've made, if you are engaging at that level, you want to feel like you've made a maverick or independent, fashion-forward choice.
I think that's absolutely
and
true.
You found this designer, little sort of tucked away, this person, they're going to be the next big thing, and you're not buying into kind of huge corporate messaging.
So and I think we're seeing that globally with our clients, particularly our online clients. They are all feeling the same. And whilst in the past we've seen that for example, Russia or the Middle East might have liked a certain type of clothing, might have been known for that. We're seeing that much less, much more now. They're more interested in the brands which are doing something which is much more unique, which is much more niche. So there's an interesting shift. I think it's less about the status of the piece because it's got the name of a designer on it, and it's much more about the artistry behind the design. And I think that's filtering down to the younger generation too. They're much more engaged with that.
I want to make a completely different observation, which anyone who knows me will be expecting. But also I think with this platform of digital broadcast in such an obvious way to, an increasing audience of young consumers who they want to sort of prime, to be the potential buyers, comes responsibility.
Yes.
And, in the way that catwalk shows used to be a closed affair and it was trade talking to trade, this is now the fashion industry talking to the world and especially reaching out to young women and young men. And so when we are seeing unconscious casting and projections of a feminine ideal, that is of big concern to me because it is so influential, and I feel at the moment our industry does cast unconsciously. It doesn't cast with a view to racial diversity, to age diversity,
with the exception of Vivienne.
She is somebody who brings in independent kind of mavericks, but on the whole.
There are exceptions. But there was a really interesting PhD recently, I think at Oxford.
Ben Barry,
yes.
The judge, it was Cambridge, Judge Business School.
Right. So I hope it will become a book, because actually I think what his research showed was not that audiences, particularly young women, necessarily feel oppressed so much by these images as they identify with them, therefore they would like a wider range. In other words, the images have a kind of positive potential as much as a negative one, which I think people often ignore.
Which I think is important to say, because I've been liaising with him for 3 years. He needed to speak a business language to CEOs who see the one ideal as a route to profit and anything veering off it as a risk, which is understandable. And he needed to say, actually, it's not going to be a risk. Women want to see a variety of bodies, and they, especially if you're looking to make money out of an older audience, it makes sense if you invite her into your world by mirroring her beauty and offering her up style options.
Look at the model that Nomad's just used. Conversely, who's now in her 80s, who looks quite incredible. And I thought there was a wit around Christopher Kane's show this morning, using the Frankenstein and the plastic and the bolts and things. I thought there was a wit to women, a little undercurrent of a message there, which I thought was very beautiful.
I want to ask about that idea because I think that is something with Burberry, is there's this kind of overpowering sense of youth to it. Every model they use is looks like they're a teenager effectively, and they've used teen icons and their clothes are very young. But
and there's nothing wrong with that. Let's just say that here.
I guess the customer would buy the perfume if they can't afford a man. That's the classic way it works, isn't it?
Or the Burberry Brit line.
But they could be making more money, as I think this research is going to help businesses to understand. And he did it from a perspective of self-esteem. He didn't do it from a business perspective, but he knew he had to speak that language. And so, that space is where I think, the fashion industry are all really excited about technology and new fabrics, but they are still really behind when it comes to understanding how the imagery they project impacts on self-esteem of the consumer. And I think that is a key space. Maybe one that will get totally ignored, because you need to be quite empathic.
But beauty companies have moved into that very successfully, so something like Dove, and had incredible financial success and success with their consumer with that. Why aren't fashion brands doing that?
It's a very different market though, isn't it? And also, we're looking at things that have to appeal globally, and whether it's right or wrong, there is those global ideals that everyone buys into.
I think it's really quite a simple logistic. I think that a very slender body makes no demands on the design, and a body with more personality to it, might be through curves, it might be through age, requires more empathic design. And I don't think that that's an easy thing to just go, right, well let's just sort all that. And I don't think designers get together and decide, well, let's just put out this one ideal because we don't want to think about anything else. But I do think that that's the slickest, easiest route to clothes show.
I think it's not just runway shows, but it's also magazine editors and it's advertising, particularly that's much more powerful, isn't it? Because actually individual designers over the years have used, women, bigger bodies, older bodies, etc.
But then how are those clothes going to be shot if they're in a size, and magazines are shooting a smaller size? They need to make sure their clothes are sample size and to get them shot. So
hence Vogue's request, across 19 different countries, which I think is quite important.
I think things have improved slightly. There are some models who are bigger, and there are some people who are using older girls now.
And also, Ruth, I like to think that All Walks had something to do with that, because we've been going for 3 years to put that dialogue out there, and also to take it into education. Because people like William Tempest, when we worked with him, said, I never got the chance to train on an ordinary body. It was a bust stand, and then it was a model who kind of mirrored a bust stand, and this has been really helpful to create a garment for a...
We always use an ordinary body for Frida, for our own line. We don't use we don't get a model in. We use one of the girls who's around just to try things on.
I want to pick up on something you said, Hal, because you mentioned it's even harder in a way for some businesses now because it's a global audience, so it moves beyond kind of British ideas of womanhood to sort of global ideas of sort of what a woman should be and what is beauty. And do you think that's something that a brand like Burberry is going to sort of... Do you think that's perhaps why they stick with the types of girls that they use, because they are so...
I think so, because it is so hugely successful and it has to appeal to so many different countries. It almost becomes like a standard, because it is, these images are going to be utilised in so many different ways, and and I think that's maybe why sometimes Burberry, even though it's so much about being British, it hasn't really got a British core identity in some ways because it's so global.
Very interesting run of...
It's a great shot, isn't it? I'm just thinking about how that will be looking on a huge screen in Hyde Park. There's the slickness.
It's so slick,
of
isn't
fashion,
it?
and of Burberry is so alluring, isn't it?
Everyone
That's
with
the thing. It's the glamour.
Yes.
Total glamour. Yeah.
And also, I think the biggest takeaway from that, and with many Burberry shoes, it's the idea of commerce. They've all got the sunglasses, they've all got the bags, they're all wearing the trench.
All the categories that they're putting out there,
But it's the kind of things that people will buy, it's the kind of things that will sell the best.
Yes.
Because the average Burberry consumer, they'll buy the bag because they can't buy an incredible outfit.
And now the blinds are closing, it seems.
Oh, yeah.
What, we're going to have
usually
rain?
Something that falls down
Do you think people still do just come to London for Burberry? Because you mentioned that before, Hal. Do you think it still has that kind of...
Well, I think it's got the pull because, it's got huge stockists, so it is, and it is a really important show, and you can see by the audience from press to celebrities.
It's a huge show, absolutely. Yeah, it is.
And I think, London it is great that Burberry are here for London. I think it is really important because it is... So there's no rain.
No rain.
That's unusual.
But spring, summer.
They would have been really pleased with that as a live production. That was so
slick. It was.
But we're back on their site now, and if you look, share this with your friends. You can like it, you can shop it, you can explore it, you can love it on Facebook. And we've already got pictures of the celebrities and sort of editors who are attending the show, and it's just so this idea of sort of democracy with their fashion, getting everyone involved. Do you think that's something that some of the smaller designers small is perhaps not the right word, the sort of designers who are starting out, so someone like Jonathan, he has a mighty brand, but do you think, how can they compete to something like that, with something like this?
I think they can compete just by doing what they're doing. I think he's growing his business, and I think he's an independent business. It's a completely different thing, and I think, as we said earlier, I think there are people who really want to buy into that unique niche brand, that level of something that's just slightly different, that you're wearing something that not everybody else is going to be wearing, that you thought about it, there's a bit of intelligence going on about it.
But do you think that Burberry is going to become sort of the brand to copy in terms of building a huge global brand? Is there anyone else doing it as well?
I'm really impressed.
I'm sure people, who wouldn't want to have a brand like that? I mean, it's glamorous, it's aspirational, it's hugely successful. I mean, they're doing what they're meant to be doing, aren't they? It's fantastic.
And moving with the time.
They're totally modern.
Yeah.
But I don't think that means that every business aspires to be that.
And doesn't have to be like that either. I think brands can still be successful without those huge platforms.
Yeah.
They can still be successful in smaller scale.
Caryn, maybe this is a question for you in terms of the historical aspect. When did this idea of kind of fashion and business come? Would you say it was someone like...
Since ever.
Since always?
Well, yes, when people make clothes to sell them. I mean, and people always use new technology, and that in itself isn't new. So, I mean, I just finished, big lot of research on early fashion shows. So people were using things like the telegraph then, 1910. They'd send models on boats to France or to New York, and people would telegraph ahead and place their orders. Or send models on, tours around Europe. So I think the idea of, harnessing new technology towards sales and a kind of consumer desire is not at all new. This particular technology is new and it's being used really well here, I think. But there are plenty of earlier examples.
But do you think the pace, is that something, when do you see that kind of turning point?
Well, I think the pace it really speeded up, with the invention of faster steamers, for example. So, when you get fashion parrots can suddenly ship their designs, or they can telegraph design details to New York even before the boats get there. So there's always a kind of race, I suppose, in fashion, isn't there? But there have been plenty of earlier times, when technology has speeded up and enabled new forms of sales and new forms of promotion.
Do you see there being a kind of burst, a kind of stop where it all gets too much and we go back? 'Cause if you look at, we've had that before with the internet and fashion. That name of that shop's gone out of my head.
I don't know, I think it's like that pendulum always swings, doesn't it? There's always going to be niche markets, and then there are going to be more mainstream consumers. And it's the same with all new communications. There are people now who adore records, there are people who even listen to, cassette tapes. But they're kind of niche markets, aren't they? They're not really what probably most of the world is listening. And I think there's, space for both.
And there's also a point, I think, you can see it happening all over, where something kind of reaches saturation point, and then people need something else because it's everywhere. Or it's, and that's the great thing about fashion, isn't it? People are always looking for the next thing to build and ride the next way.
So there's often just a shift in the energy of how it sits, whether the luxury brands are doing things. I mean, at the moment we're seeing a slight shift to things being slightly more couture at that level, slightly more expensive even in how they're being made, and there's that kind of shift. And there's also another shift which is just about more democratic fashion at that lower price. So I think things change, and that sometimes that will move back, sometimes the other part will move up. And
I think also, sustainable fashion is making a bigger and bigger kind of impact, and the idea of slow fashion, the idea of valuing something beyond the season, it's got a story, our desire for second-hand clothes, that space.
Or the heritage of something that you can have.
But I think interestingly, Burberry is perhaps straddling that quite well, because as much as they're very new and on the pulse with their sort of digital innovations, they do kind of keep that idea of, if you buy something from one of their collections, you don't get the idea that next season it's going to be out of fashion. They're really pushing that heritage.
True of all heritage brands, isn't it? Particularly leather goods, and and handbags always hold their value at auction really well. So people do buy them for investments too.
Yes.
So do you think in a way that for Burberry, it sounds very critical to say, but it's almost moved away from fashion and become more about being a brand?
It's a lifestyle brand.
Exactly.
Definitely, global lifestyle brand. You know, what we've just seen is just part of the huge mechanics of the whole brand, really. That's a tiny, promotional platform, really, that Prorsum collection.
An interesting point I think you made about, holding value. As more and more people aren't trusting banks, sales of art is going up so that the money goes somewhere else. Maybe that's a space where luxury that holds its value in auction, like gold, has other...
But also, he has this idea, of the experience of shopping, of sort of theatre of shopping, Christopher Bailey. So he's got this, I can't remember, it's on the website, something about experiences and creating experiences in relation to the alteration service. And actually, an alteration service is something that department stores always had until they became a bit more like supermarkets. And on some level, I think, what that store's doing is recreating a lot of the excitement and the glamour of really early mid-19th century department stores, when they were these huge sort of palaces of consumption, and they used all these tricks and gizmos and lighting and tremendous kind of excitement. And now going to, much as I love certain Oxford Street department stores, it's kind of quite ordinary going there and buying your haberdashery, isn't it? So they've lost that sort of exciting, beguiling kind of theatrical element, and on some level I think that's what he's doing in the store, and with this whole sort of concatenation of sort of technological but also very luxurious kind of goods and services, I suppose.
He has this, as well as that, he's doing this, you can buy, if you bought a suit from him before, they have all the measurements.
That's
so you can look at the fabrics and you can buy it again, either online, or if you're at the other side of the world, you can order your suit in the fabric you want.
Exactly, and it's a bit like, instead of your own shop assistant remembering your measurements and what you bought last time, they've got the iPad that will bring up, but it's the same experience, isn't it, as someone being very nice to you when you're making an expensive purchase.
Is that kind of a sign of the times? Do you think consumers sort of being more careful with their money, thinking, I'm not just going to part with things easily, I want to really feel like I've earned something, and like they've earned my sort of worth in a way, they've earned my money. And
well, I think we all like it when the shop assistant is nice to us, and it's just another version of that, isn't it, really?
It's just good service, it's offering more.
Exactly. Do you find that matches that the consumers becoming even more kind of savvy and even more expectant of sort of the retail experience?
I think that's something that we've always tried to focus on, is that to make it very accessible, to make it very friendly, and to build trust with the customer, and also to talk to them, to try and understand what they want in advance of them wanting it, and then to constantly listen to what they're saying. And we have this great opportunity now, which we work with some of the British designers. We talk to them about what our customers are looking for, and they listen to us, and they'll listen to us about price points, they'll listen to us about skirt lengths, and they will then either create something exclusively for us, or they'll filter that information through into the collections, which is that's all about customer service. So it's affecting the designs as far as we're concerned, as well as the in-store experience, as well as what you're looking at online, how you're talking to the customer who wants to shop online, giving them every option available. And there's almost a sense of make it happen rather than not. You just don't have to think about the problems. You just got to think about the solutions. How to get their customer there. How to get them what they want. So if they want something delivered across the world in 24 hours and they want it in this size, you've got to make sure that you've got it. That you've understood the demand for the garment and how quickly they want it there. And if they want to return 3 of them, that too. So that's what you have to understand, the whole experience, and I think that's what he's doing brilliantly well. That's what they're doing brilliantly well.
I want to pick up on a word you said, because you said trust, which I think is a really interesting thing that Burberry sort of really managed to cultivate, and this idea of kind of really sort of being a part of a brand. And is that something, to me that's something new in fashion, this idea that you're actually really involved in it, like they call their website sort of like Burberry World, and it's kind of less about a choice, it's more like everyone's involved in it, and that's more than a lifestyle brand, isn't it?
It's all encompassing. It's actually quite scary when a brand calls themselves a world, because they believe they are everything, which maybe Burberry are.
It's a big statement to make. But I guess if you've bought a coat from them before and you've loved the experience and you need another one, or you'd like one in a different colour, then you do have that trust. You are going to go back to Burberry World.
Well, I think it is very clever.
Reliability.
What they're doing, is that they are really opening up their business to show everybody that you can be part of it, through whether it's through the art of the trench or through the music things they do. They're inviting people to go to their store to listen to bands. It is really all-encompassing, which is a bit of a different idea for a luxury brand, to think that we want you to come to us. It's always been much more exclusive and aspirational, where I think what Burberry are doing are trying to see much more, open arms in some ways.
And you don't think that there's kind of a threat that will dilute their kind of sense of luxury? And
I don't think so, because they're allowing people to come in different points. So if you're younger, you can go and listen to the music, but you're not necessarily going to be able to afford the Prorsum range. So
you can get a playlist.
Yeah.
Which is genius too.
I have a brilliant quote that I want to read to you. It's Bertelli, who's chief executive of Prada, and he said that he'd never sell high-end Prada collections online because he's concerned about compromising our image by using a channel where second-hand cars and books are sold. Do you think he needs to sort of wake up and smell?
Yes, because honestly, you can buy second-hand cars and books in shops.
Yes.
So does that mean that Prada should close all its shops?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bonkers argument, really,
I think
it doesn't.
it's a bit silly to say
Why
never.
is this
actually,
idea that luxury can't work on the internet? Because I think there is that kind of idea that there's only real luxury in the store, where there's your lilies and the fragrance, and you can't create that sort of online. Do you think that? Why is there that sort of prevailing idea in fashion? That
I think it's changing. I don't know when he said that, but I think he's probably eating his words now. He's probably developing his website as we speak.
Having watched that.
Yeah.
Exactly. With sites like Net-a-Porter, I think that changed a lot.
Massively.
There's an interesting we're talking about a democratization of fashion. There was a report in the Daily about how Topshop are also rolling this out. And interestingly, the Burberry marketing guy has gone to Topshop. He's obviously gone, now, we've been working on this great thing, Burberry, you're going to love it.
Also, I'm not sure it is really democratization. I mean, it would be democratic to lower the prices and let everyone have a Burberry Mac for £10. That's democracy. But the fact that you're sort of selling in innovative ways to, more bigger, better markets, great. But I don't think it's particularly democratic. I think it's smart business.
Absolutely.
But not democracy.
But it's under the guise of democracy.
Yes.
It's under the guise of democracy. You can come into our world. Ultimately, it's data capture. It's.
I think what's meant by democracy here is that they're welcoming with open arms any type of customer who there's no longer that exclusivity, that snobbery about who comes through the door. And I think even. And of course, we're not talking about global poverty or anything like that, but there are people in the world students I know, who don't have any money at all and would, eat baked beans for a week to have that key fashion piece. And I think that's that aspirational fashion customer that's just really engaged with it. And you've got to welcome.
That's going to be baked beans for at least 3 months.
Yes, that's
But I would say in a way that's kind of an argument against a brand like Burberry, and it goes back to what you were saying about someone like Jonathan Saunders and this idea of something really special and almost kind of bespoke and artisan. Because I think something like Burberry, this idea you get from it is quantity. I mean, look at these tweets just flying in about Burberry and that huge sort of parade of 1 million Macs, and there is almost this sense that it's kind of how much they have to offer and how much they have to sell, and that it's not kind of one special piece that you save for, it's something that millions of other people have. And do you think that might be something that's going to sort of work against Burberry, especially in the British market, perhaps not
I don't
internationally?
think that millions of people are going to have what's on the Prorsum runway. I think it's quite a small amount of people, actually. I think maybe the Brit or maybe the lower price brands, but I think obviously the opportunity for them lies in beauty and perfume and all the things that they're selling on top of that. So I don't think that what we're seeing today is going to be mass.
But that message of all those trenches going down is nodding towards that idea of kind of an army of Burberry, kind of the might of Burberry, and how many people buy into it.
I think you're buying into the brand, not necessarily into the collection. And also, where Burberry is really growing is the new markets. So that's why it's so important that they, are doing shows like this. because their business is still growing. Really.
It is, and ultimately the image is the thing that people connect with, rather than all the words and all of the process. Our brains now, and certainly when I'm talking to interns, they go, "Oh, nobody would read that. Don't put that on the site. Nobody's going to see that." It's a picture, and it's taken in a second, and that's, it kind of burns into the back of your retina. That image of all of the metallic max, that's the thing, and that's what will drive the nail varnish.
It's the subconscious. Yes. Absolutely, totally well. Yes.
I want to talk a little bit more sort of closely about Burberry, about Christopher Bailey and kind of what he did for the brand, because I think we think of. I think it's hard to remember Burberry in a way before Christopher Bailey, because what he's done has become so central to sort of their identity now. Do you think he is sort of one of the master sort of fashion businessmen or fashion designers? It depends how you sort of seat him of this sort of his generation. Big question.
It's a good question.
I'm going to guess, because I don't know, but I am going to guess that we know this is a really cutthroat space where creativity is corporatized, and we've seen designers, amazingly talented designers, just go under with the pressure. So I'm going to guess that this particular corporate has more empathy with the creative and is not, milking them in the way that, we've seen others be milked.
You see that with some brands like Alexander McQueen, where I think Sarah Burton is very well supported by that business and is allowed to be creative and flourish.
It's very similar to what we said about Vivienne Westwood actually yesterday, the idea of having those kind of structures in place to let someone really sort of put their vision into practice without sort of getting
but
sort
I
of
also think his personality has got everything to do with it. He's a very grounded human being, and that has got to count for quite a lot.
I think that's key actually. I really do. That person, and he's a visionary. He's looking. I think from the beginning, he's not just looking at the clothes. He's looking at the big picture with his eye, and his eye is remarkable.
Do you think more designers need to sort of follow that pattern? Because I think it would be actually quite rare to go into, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, but go into someone like LCF or Central St Martin's and talk to, especially the design students, and say, who do you look up to? I think very few would say Christopher Bailey, perhaps unfairly. You're more likely to get them saying something like Nicolas Gassier, Christopher Kane, kind of those more...
Yeah, I think it's because the emphasis, particularly on British art schools, is the emphasis to be radical and creative, and we know we're both at Central St Martin's. We don't really teach business. The emphasis is definitely about.
Luckily for them.
It's definitely about doing something different and being creative. So and that's how these students are trained to be doing things differently. They're not thinking about business.
I think that's a really good point.
And it is different, I think, in other, people have told me, in other design schools in other countries where, if you say we give the students a brief and they head for the library, people laugh at you. And they go, why would they go to the library? But that's where our students go.
Yeah, research.
Do you think students, this controversial question, do you think they should be taught business? Do you think Louise Wallstrom should give them a lesson in creating a fashion business? Do you think that will start to happen?
No, not at Central St Martin's. Because the emphasis of that college is the emphasis on design and concepts. And
it's also quite difficult to get students to do practical things like going to business classes and language classes, because that's not really why they go to college, if they want to do fashion, I mean.
But do you think that's a problem, sending students who have these amazing visions and this incredible talent into an industry which is a cutthroat, fast industry?
They actually need to know they've got to link up with somebody who specialises in that.
I think the BFC have been pretty good about it. They have a great mentoring program for young designers who want to get started independently. And then I think there's a whole tranche of young designers, and correct me if I'm wrong here, who get hired by big companies, like possibly Burberry, like Max Mara, those kind, where they learn at that scale. I mean, that experience has got to count for everything. If they were going to start out, probably best that they have that experience under their belt first. Although I know a lot of them try to.
I would go further than that. I don't think a single creative should attempt to run their own business.
Well, I agree with you, but we do. I think we do see it.
I think there has been a shift in changing. When you were talking about before about a lot of designers, amazingly creative designers just, failing in terms of their business, but you are seeing a shift where the new designers are being much more savvy, more commercial, thinking about being a designer is not just about shock and awe, it's about selling clothes.
Yeah.
And that's definitely happening.
I actually meant that when I said go under, I meant emotionally.
Yeah, okay.
Not the business. I'm thinking of John and Lee. I'm just thinking of the pressure to churn it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he must be, engaged with that same pressure, but he always seems...
And I think the more successful a designer is, the more pressure they're going to feel on themselves. I mean, looking at the ones we've seen in the last few days, I feel for them because they've done incredible things in the last few seasons, and we're all looking at them again and expecting them to have moved things on, something more beautiful. What are you going to bring out today? And they are, the British ones right now are really stepping right up to it.
Is that sustainable, that kind of, that pressure and that sort of that level of sort of expectations that's placed on people's shoulders, especially in fashion? Can that last?
Well, that's essentially what fashion's about. It's about change, and that's why we're all here, and that's why we all are consumed by it, because we do want to see things change and move on.
Oh God, no, I try and avoid that.
Do you?
No, I don't want that world.
But can you change? That's kind of something I think about. Can you change, and can you be revolutionary, and can you be truly creative when you've got to produce kind of a resort and also another collection, something for Topshop, and your collaboration with a denim brand?
I think you can. I think they are. I think some of them are doing it really, really well. Yeah.
And also when we have been talking about Burberry, what we haven't, we're talking about how successful Christopher is, but it's also about his team, and there is a huge amount of team of designers that he will work with, which is, it's not one man doing the whole vision.
He's the visionary, isn't he?
But he's got a huge support team of designers doing different parts of the collection, and that's really important.
And also I think you have to, for younger designers sort of tuning in, I think you have to find your own place. Don't ask fashion to validate you. Decide what you want to put out there and stand by it and enjoy it and celebrate it. Because if you're thinking success is only measured by how much brand coverage I can make, on a digital level, or quarterly results, that's a really horrible place to operate from as a creative.
Sorry, I also believe that some of the younger designers should stop being so obsessed with having a show as well. I think that in itself creates pressure for them. There's no necessity for it. There's a lot of different ways now of presenting.
Especially now.
Absolutely.
But that might be getting better, because I think 10, 15 years ago it was really hard for young London designers, because they felt that it's almost, a loss of face, but professionally they couldn't not show, because it was almost like saying, right, I've given up, it's too hard. And that was a huge pressure financially as well as emotionally.
I'm loving all these little fashion films now. Teaming up sorts and lovely films. The William Tempest film for River Island with Ryan Hope is spectacular. It's a great piece of imagery, of course, great for promoting.
It's actually really interesting you mentioned that, because I wanted to kind of bring on, because you said the theatre of fashion at one point, and I wanted to ask about that idea of kind of the show and the hype that surrounds Fashion Week, and whether we should be moving away to that and looking at things like fashion film or showing. There are some brands that are just showing digitally this season, so See by Chloe, and whether young designers should be looking at that, and perhaps how you can kind of speak of the fact that we did those London men's collections, and as much as everyone said this is fantastic, and I think it is fantastic for London, it's forcing young menswear designers in London to go through the expense of a show. And why do we fetishise the show so much? In fashion?
I think it's rooted in history. It's the idea if you can have a show, it's that you've made it. You've been able to pull this together. It's a big ego boost that you can have a show. But I think what digital platforms have allowed is that people can have films like you were talking about, and it does allow people to have different levels of presentations, which I think is brilliant for everybody, and it allows people in at different points as well.
And actually that is a celebration for digital and for technical advance, because John Maybury teamed up with Rifat Osbet in the 90s to do exactly that, but there was no broadcast fast platform.
Exactly.
It was too
Yeah,
soon.
exactly.
You know, they were visionaries, but now it's the technology will support doing it.
But there was a logic to shows in terms of communications, and that's why there were all those rules, you know, that magazines like Vogue wouldn't, you know, publish, what was it, I think 30 or more days, you know, after the show, then they would publish the photographs. So there were all those sort of agreements, and it was about communication and sales, but actually you don't really need a show for communication and sales in the same way in a digital age. And you know, so and I think that's a good thing for younger designers.
Yay to technology!
Yes, that's a big sense. Maybe that's actually a good note to wrap things up on, this idea that actually it's not all evil with the internet. Thank you so much. Should we give Chris and Bailey a round of applause?
Yeah.
For closing?